On the 13th of June, you are going to come before Saint Anthony with a name pressed against your heart, the name of the departed loved one you carry. And you are going to ask. You are going to ask with the intensity of someone who has prayed for years for his soul who is no longer here. But there is a question you have carried inside for a long time, and you have never dared to say it out loud. What if everything you have asked the saint of Padua for that soul all these years was never what heaven was willing to grant you? What if the grace of June 13th had something set aside for your departed loved one? Something only that soul needed, and your request, so tearful and so often repeated, was asking for something else entirely. That is exactly what Saint Teresa of Jesus warned about when she spoke of misplaced petitions made to heaven with sincere devotion. There are specific prayers, deeply tearful prayers, that millions of devout Catholics direct to Saint Anthony every June 13th for their departed loved ones, without realizing that they are closing the very door they were hoping to open. Today, you are going to learn which petitions are mistaken, why Catholic teaching warns against them, and what to ask for instead, so that the soul of your departed loved one receives, on this day, the grace that has been reserved for it. Before we go on, write in the comments the name of your departed loved one, so that he or she may be remembered in this teaching. And subscribe to this channel now and tap the bell, because every message that arrives here was prepared for souls like that one, and like yours. What comes next was set aside for those who have prayed long and still feel that something is missing. Arcella, June 13th, 1231. Anthony of Padua is dying. He is 36 years old. His body, worn out by ceaseless preaching and by a frailty he had been carrying for months, no longer responds. His Franciscan brothers have carried him by cart to the convent of the Poor Clares on the outskirts of Padua, because he knows he will not reach the city. There, in a borrowed cell, he asks them to sing him the hymn, O Gloriosa Domina. When the singing ends, he lifts his eyes toward a point his brothers cannot see, smiles, and dies. At dawn, the Poor Clares find his body still warm. The scent in the cell, according to testimonies preserved in the archives of Padua, was the scent of freshly baked bread, though there was not a single oven burning for miles around. That death was the beginning of everything, because Anthony, in the months that followed, began to make himself present in Padua with such an abundance of favors granted that Pope Gregory IX canonized him 11 months later, the fastest canonization in the history of the Church up to that date. And ever since, for nearly 8 centuries, the faithful from all over the world have come to the saint of Padua with a confidence that few saints inspire, with good reason. Anthony revealed himself very early as an extraordinarily generous intercessor. What few of the faithful realize is exactly which things he is permitted to grant and which things God reserved for other channels. Because Anthony, in his lifetime, was many things that the average devotee never knew. He was first a canon regular of St. Augustine in Coimbra, formed in theology with a doctrinal depth that few preachers of his time could equal. Then, moved by the martyrdom of the first Franciscans in Morocco, he left the Augustinian rule and entered the young order of St. Francis. He preached throughout Italy and southern France against the Cathar and Albigensian heresies, with a doctrinal clarity that earned him the official title conferred by Pope Pius XII in 1946 of Evangelical Doctor, Doctor of the Church. Only 37 saints in all of Catholic history have received that title. Anthony is one of them. And the witnesses to those sermons, skeptical at first, would end up kneeling in the public squares, asking for confession in the middle of the afternoon, with no bread in their stomachs, having forgotten the day's work they had left half finished. That means something very concrete for the soul of your departed loved one. It means the saint you come to on June 13th was never simply a popular wonder worker. He is a theologian. He is a preacher of the word. He is a soul whose intercession is doctrinally situated within an order that God Himself established for the salvation of souls. That order has rules, it has hierarchies, it has precise channels. When a devotee asks Anthony for things that do not fall within what he may grant, the saint hears the prayer with charity and presents that intention before the throne of God. But heaven sometimes does not answer with what was requested, because what was requested falls outside the very economy of salvation. The bread of the poor, the lost objects, the well-disposed marriages, the newborn children, all of that belongs to the Antonian charism, confirmed by centuries of the Church's experience. But Anthony's central charism, the one at the root of all the others, is something different. It is the restitution of what has been lost. And here we have to look closely at what that word means, because the confusion begins right there. Anthony restores. Anthony gives back what had gone away. In his lifetime, his preaching gave thousands of souls back to the true faith after they had fallen into heresy. It gave repentant husbands back to the homes they had abandoned. It gave prodigal sons back to the fathers who were waiting for them. It gave rich men back the consciousness of the poor. And yes, on a material level, it also gave back lost objects. The famous psalter that a novice took with him when he fled the monastery returned through the saint's intercession. But that object was the outward sign of something deeper. The novice, along with the book, also gave his vocation back within a few weeks. Here is the key that almost no one has ever explained to you. Anthony is a saint of conversion before he is a saint of things. The things he restores are always the vehicle of an inner conversion. That is why, when a devotee asks the saint of Padua to return a lost object without any disposition of change in the heart, Anthony often answers yes. But through that concrete favor, he is always asking for something more: a step forward, a conversion, a return to the sacraments, a reconciliation with a wounded family member. Applied to your departed loved ones, that changes everything. Because it means that when you come to Anthony on June 13th with the name of a departed loved one in your heart, what the saint can ask for that soul before the throne of God is shaped by his own charism, restitution. Spiritual restitution. Restitution of what that soul left incomplete. Restitution of the faith in those who surrounded that soul. Restitution of the sacrament where the sacrament was forgotten. That is what Anthony can ask with singular effectiveness before God on June 13th. That, according to the order which Providence entrusted to his charism. When the petition asks for something else, the saint intercedes all the same, because the charity of the saints is always generous. But heaven's answer remains conditioned by what the intercessor's charism encompasses within God's design. And here, Saint Teresa of Jesus, the discalced Carmelite, who read the Franciscans closely through her contact with Saint Peter of Alcantara and Father Gracian, has a key word about the saint of Padua that few devotees have underlined in 4 centuries. It appears in one of her letters, and from within, it disqualifies every superstitious devotion to Anthony. That word is going to surprise you more than you think. Do you know what word Saint Teresa of Jesus used when someone asked her for advice about devotion to the saints? Sound judgment, that was her word. It appears in several of her letters, especially in one addressed to her brother Lorenzo de Cepeda around the year 1577, where she warns him that the most fervent devotion can grow confused when it loses sound judgment. Sound judgment in the Spanish of the Saint of Avila never meant coldness or calculation. It meant something very precise, inner order, knowing what to ask for, whom to ask, and why one is asking. Without that sound judgment, she said, the most fervent souls end up praying a great deal and receiving little, because they ask against the order heaven has established for prayer to bear fruit at the right moment. And here is where Teresian teaching becomes indispensable for understanding what happens on June 13th. Because Saint Teresa of Jesus drawing on the visions gathered in the seventh mansions of the interior castle, and on her own experience guiding souls in the discalced Carmels she was founding across Castile, saw with rare clarity the exact difference between two realities that the average devotee tends to confuse. The difference between a saint in glory and a soul in purgatory. The saint in glory already sees God face to face. His will is fully conformed to the divine will. His intercession is perfect because he always asks for what God wills, and God always hears that intercession with favor. Anthony of Padua is one of those saints. When you ask him for something, Anthony receives that petition and presents it before the throne of God, but he presents it filtered through his own beatific vision. If what you ask is outside God's design, Anthony himself reformulates it before presenting it, because his charity consists in giving you what is good for you, not necessarily what you think you want. The soul in purgatory is in a completely different state. It undergoes a passive purification. Its vision is still veiled, awaiting the encounter with the face of the Father. And it lacks the capacity to intercede for others in the proper sense, because its will, though set toward the good, is still bound by the debt that keeps it there. It can only receive. It receives what the living offer for it. It receives what the saints in heaven intercede for it. It receives what God's mercy grants through the blood of Christ applied at each Mass, at each rosary prayed with attention, at each act of charity offered in its name. That architecture, which sounds technical, changes everything when applied to your concrete situation. Because it means that when you come to St. Anthony on June 13th, with the name of a departed loved one in your heart, the correct flow is this. You ask the saint in glory on behalf of the soul in purgatory. The saint in glory intercedes before God. God grants grace to the soul in purgatory. And that soul, once freed from purgatory, can then now in glory intercede for you from heaven. When this flow is broken, things get tangled, and it breaks in many ways. The first, when we ask the soul of the departed loved one to intercede for us too soon, before the purification is complete. The second, when we ask the saint in glory for signs and certainties that only God can give. The third, when we confuse the saint's charism with a magical power independent of God's will. The fourth, and gravest of all, when we lose that sound judgment Saint Teresa of Avila insisted on so often. In chapter 33 of the book of her life, she wrote in her own words something no Catholic devotee should overlook, not even those who have prayed deeply for years. She said that many good Christians lose the fruit of their prayers because they ask God for things that are not good for them, and they grieve when those things do not come, believing that God is not listening when in fact what is happening is that God is hearing them all too well, and precisely for that reason, He does not grant what was asked. That sentence, read slowly, also explains what happens with many petitions directed to Saint Anthony for the departed loved ones. When you ask the saint of Padua to give you absolute certainty about the final salvation of your departed loved one, Anthony hears the petition, carries it before God, and God denies it. He denies it out of love, because granting that certainty would eliminate the suffrage. Persevering prayer would lose its meaning. Masses requested year after year would lose their reason for being. Alms given in the name of the departed loved one would become unnecessary. And with all of that, the entire architecture of intercession by the living would disappear, which is precisely the mechanism by which the debt of the departed loved one is paid by the charity of those who love that soul in life. That is the Teresian sound judgment applied to June 13th, knowing what to ask, knowing what one must never ask, knowing why some petitions receive an answer and others run up against the limit of what the saint can grant within the divine order. Now comes what matters. Now comes the list of petitions that millions of devout Catholics have been directing to St. Anthony every June 13th, year after year. without realizing that each one carries a precise doctrinal warning. Saint Teresa of Jesus, if she could sit with you this morning, would name them one by one with that maternal firmness she had when she corrected her daughters at the Carmel. And she would begin, surely, with the most common one, with the one that is prayed most often on June 13th in Hispanic homes, with the one that seems most innocent and most loving, and which, nevertheless, has been wasting an enormous amount of grace for centuries in devout homes like yours. It is a petition you yourself may have made, perhaps this year, perhaps last year, perhaps every year of your grief, without ever pausing to examine it. The first petition, the most loving of them all, the one that rises from the heart with the most force on June 13th. A lit candle, an image of the Saint of Padua on the living room cabinet, the image you have been gazing at for years with the rosary in your hands, and a whisper you have wanted to say out loud for a long time. Tell me he is already in heaven. Tell me she has come out of purgatory. Give me the certainty I have been asking for in silence ever since he died. It is the petition made in silence while the hands hold the rosary. It is the one spoken the moment the bedroom door closes, when no one else is listening. It is the one wept at the Mass on June 13th, when the priest mentions the saint in his homily and the heart leaps, because without meaning to, the devotee asks Anthony for what God himself has reserved for himself alone. Because that is exactly what happens when someone asks the Saint of Padua to confirm the present state of the soul of the departed loved one. That person is asking unknowingly for what the Catechism of the Catholic Church establishes with indisputable clarity, that only God knows the final state of each human soul. Neither Anthony nor any saint in glory, not even the Virgin Mary, grants that certainty to the living during the earthly pilgrimage. The reason is theologically deep. The certainty you ask about the eternal destiny of another person would mean, in a sense, accessing the particular judgment Christ has already pronounced over that soul. And that judgment, according to the teaching of the Greek and Latin fathers, is veiled from the living precisely so that hope, persevering prayer, and active charity for the departed may be sustained. That certainty is reserved for the moment of the believer's own particular judgment, in the instant of death. Before that instant, no devotee may lawfully ask for and receive absolute confirmation of another soul's eternal destiny. And here, Saint Teresa of Jesus left written in chapter 38 of the book of her life something of stunning sobriety. She told how in her time she had seen many devout souls torment themselves asking God for clear signs of the salvation of their departed loved ones, and how those signs almost never came. God heard the grieving heart's pain with all his mercy, but granting that certainty, said the Saint of Avila, would suspend in the soul the urgency of the love that keeps on praying. Suspend in the soul. Those words of hers are worth gold, because they mean that when you ask the Saint of Padua for certainty about your departed loved one, Anthony hears that petition, presents it before God, and God answers with a silence that is protection. He protects the soul of the departed loved one, still on its path of purification. And he also protects you, who would be left without reason to keep praying if you received the confirmation you ask for so insistently. There is an experience recorded in the book of her Foundations that illustrates this with a starkness few commentators have underlined. Saint Teresa of Avila recounts that once, when a nun in one of her Carmels died, several of the sisters began to feel such inner consolation that they took it for granted that the departed sister's soul had gone directly to heaven. They stopped offering masses for her. They stopped praying the office for the dead. Weeks passed in that satisfied serenity. Then, in an inner vision the saint describes with restraint, it was shown to her that the departed sister was still undergoing the necessary purification, and that the sister's presumption had suspended the flow of grace that would have freed her much sooner. The saint had the masses resumed. The departed sister, according to the account, reached eternal rest very soon after. That scene sums up, in miniature, the danger of the first misdirected petition. When you ask the saint of Padua for the certainty that your departed loved one is already in heaven, and you believe you have received it, the immediate effect is just one thing. You stop praying with the intensity that soul still needs, and that ceasing to pray, multiplied across years, multiplied across all the people who love the departed soul and have also received the same false certainty, prolongs the debt of that soul in a way that no later tears can ever fully repair. Here is the peak of grace that June 13th offers you, and which this petition unwittingly smothers. Anthony, in his charism of restitution, could ask on behalf of your departed loved one for an acceleration of the process. He could ask that the graces accumulated by years of family prayer be applied. He could ask that the merits of a sacrament celebrated in his honor on that day be added to the account. But all of that remains conditional on your continuing to ask from the correct position. As someone who prays for a soul that still needs prayer, never as someone who has already received confirmation that prayer is no longer needed. What then should you do on June 13th if you want to come to the saint of Padua with the name of your departed loved one in your heart? Saint Teresa of Jesus' answer is of maternal simplicity. Come asking that your own prayer be more effective, more persevering, more confident. Come asking that the saint present before God the suffrage you are offering at that very moment. Come above all, without trying to obtain from the saint what no saint grants, the reading of the closed book where only God reads. And there is a second petition, even more subtle, even more widespread in devout homes like yours, that also deserves a slow look and a calm examination. A petition that seems even more loving than the first, because it asks to see the departed loved one. It asks to hear that voice. It asks to touch that soul somehow, even in dreams, even with a minimal sign. And it crosses, without the devotee knowing it, a line the Church has guarded since the earliest centuries. 3 a.m, a woman opens her eyes with a pounding heart, sure she has heard footsteps in the hallway. She sits up slowly without turning on the light. She listens. The house is in complete silence. She looks toward the nightstand, where the holy card of Saint Anthony rests, the card her departed husband gave her the last June 13th they spent together. And she feels, with an intensity that frightens her and consoles her at the same time, that he has just passed through the room. That scene repeats itself with minimal variations in thousands of devout homes every year. And behind many of them lies a petition the devotee made without weighing its reach. A petition that Saint Teresa of Jesus, if she heard it leave your lips, would correct with the maternal firmness she had whenever something exposed you to a real spiritual danger. This is the second misdirected petition, and it is worded in something like these words. Saint Anthony, let my departed loved one speak to me. Let him appear to me in dreams. Let her leave me a clear sign, a feather, a scent, a voice, something to tell me she is near. You who give back what has been lost, give me back his presence. The heart that speaks these words is full of love. That is why it is the most moving petition of them all. That is also why it is the most slippery. Because it asks the saint of Padua to serve as a bridge between the living and the dead, in a sense that the Church, from the earliest centuries, has distinguished with great precision from the legitimate bridge that the communion of saints establishes in an entirely different way. The difference is this: when you pray for your departed loved one, there is a bridge that joins your prayer with the soul in purgatory through the merit of Christ. That bridge flows from the living toward the souls. When your departed loved one, once purified and in glory, intercedes for you, there is another bridge that flows from heaven toward you. The Church recognizes both bridges, teaches them, celebrates them every November 2nd. But there is a third bridge that sacred scripture expressly forbids. The bridge the living try to build toward the dead in order to receive direct communication, words, forced apparitions, specific messages. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 31, and Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 10 through 12 are unmistakable. And the episode of King Saul asking the witch of Endor to call up the prophet Samuel remained as a perpetual warning for the people of God. That door the Lord closed out of love. He closed it because he knew the living in their pain would open paths through which any presence at all could slip in, other than the one they were seeking. And here, Saint Teresa of Avila had a spiritual insight that no modern manual has yet equaled. In the 6 mansions of the interior castle, chapter 9, she wrote in her own words that the spiritual consolations sought with too much force by the soul run the risk of coming from a place the soul would never imagine. The saint said that when the soul asks to see, to hear, to feel, to receive signs, the enemy finds a crack through which to satisfy that disordered request, dressing himself up as consolation, as a beloved voice, as a familiar presence. And the soul, in good faith, receives that sign as grace. Not knowing that the source lay in the crack, the soul itself opened with the petition. In a letter to Father Gracian dated 1578, written near the end of her life, she said it even more plainly. She warned him that some of her religious sisters were asking for appearances of beloved departed souls, and at times seemed to receive them, and that she, after much discernment, had concluded that in most of those cases the soul had deceived itself, or something worse had taken advantage of the desire. The Saint of Avila asked her daughters never to seek sensible signs from the next life, to trust pure faith, to let heaven choose how to console without imposing conditions. Here is the peak of seriousness in this second petition. When you ask the Saint of Padua to mediate a concrete apparition of your departed loved one, Anthony hears the petition with his infinite charity and presents it before God. But God, who knows the dangers of the forbidden bridge, almost always answers with a silence that is protection. And sometimes, when that petition is made insistently and with a very strong emotional attachment, what arrives as an answer ends up coming through another channel. A channel that dresses itself up as consolation. A channel that sounds like the voice of a lost husband, like the gesture of a departed father, like the perfume of a deceased mother, and which never came from heaven. Experienced confessors know these cases. Holy women who ended up tied to a consolation that drew them away from the sacraments. Devout fathers who stopped praying for their departed sons because they felt that he was already with them. And whole families who lived for years thinking that the departed one was accompanying them, when what was accompanying them was a different shadow that desire had summoned without realizing it. What then should you do on June 13th if you miss your departed loved one so much that you can almost feel his or her presence? The Teresian answer is the most freeing one ever offered in 4 centuries. Come to the Saint of Padua without asking for specific signs. Ask him with humility that God send consolation if God wills it and in whatever form God chooses. And accept the silence when silence comes, because that silence of heaven is also presence, is also communion, is also true love. There is still a third petition that millions of devotees direct to the Saint of Padua on June 13th, deeply rooted in his best-known popular charism, and which nevertheless, when applied to the departed loved ones, can turn into a subtle spiritual distraction. A petition that has to do with an object that belonged to the departed loved one and that one day was lost or broken or simply disappeared. On the dresser there is a stopped clock, the clock he wore. It has been sitting there since the day of the funeral, in the same exact position, with the hour frozen at the very moment when someone, in a gesture of mourning, decided not to wind it again. Next to it, a small photograph. A little further, a rosary. And among all those objects, one that is missing. A specific object that was lost. A wedding ring, a medal, a letter that had been tucked inside the prayer book. Something that belonged to your departed loved one and one day disappeared from the house without anyone being able to explain how. On June 13th, you come to the Saint of Padua with that specific loss pierced into your heart, alongside the name of your departed loved one. And you make the third misdirected petition with words like these: Saint Anthony, you who give back what has been lost, give me back that thing of his. Give it back to me because it was the only thing I had left of him. Give it back to me because without that object, I feel that even his memory is slipping away. The saint listens. His popular charism activates, because this is what entire generations of devotees have come to him for. The saint of lost things, applied to the object of the departed loved one, seems like the perfect combination. And yet here Saint Teresa of Jesus, if she could be with you in the kitchen while you speak to his image, would stop you gently to point out what that petition is hiding inside. Because the object of the departed loved one, in many devout homes, has slowly come to occupy over the years a place that belongs only to the soul of the departed loved one. It has become a substitute. In the stopped clock, in the put-away wedding ring, in the lost medal the devotee asks the saint about, there is an emotional intensity deposited that the soul of the departed loved one, wherever that soul is, never receives in the same way. Prayer for the soul becomes more and more spaced out. The Mass requested in his name is gradually forgotten, but the search for the lost object never stops. The conversation with the saint about that object goes on for years. And without anyone noticing, devotion has shifted from the departed loved one to the material reminder of the departed loved one. In chapter 10 of The Way of Perfection, Saint Teresa of Avila wrote, in her own words, a warning that few commentators have applied to this case, though it fits with precision. She said that the devout soul can attach itself to small things as fiercely as another soul attaches itself to large ones, and that those tiny attachments are precisely the most dangerous, because they look innocent and they consume the best part of the affection that should go entirely to God and to one's neighbor in God. Applied to the departed loved ones, that Teresian principle resonates with uncomfortable clarity. The husband's clock, the mother's ring, the father's letter can hold the heart in a way that ends up robbing prayer from the very soul for whom that prayer was needed. And here, there is a distinction that matters a great deal. The Church has never condemned the keeping of objects of the departed loved one. The Church blesses family relics, portraits, inherited rosaries. The problem begins when the object becomes the principal channel of affection, when the devotee feels that losing that object would mean losing the departed one all over again, when the petition to the Saint of Padua centers on the object and forgets the soul. That inversion, very slow, almost imperceptible, is the one Saint Teresa of Jesus disqualifies with her teaching on spiritual attachments. There is a documented case in a chronicle from the convent of Salamanca, gathered by the saint herself in later letters. A devout widow had lost her husband's wedding ring on the day of the funeral, according to the preserved document. For years, she came to Saint Anthony asking him to return it to her. The chronicle says that the widow gradually stopped attending the monthly masses for her husband's soul, distracted by the endless search for the object. The family prayer for the departed loved one was slowly going out, and when the confessor pointed out to her what was happening, the woman understood. She gave up the petition for the object. She started requesting masses again. She started praying the office again. And the chronicle says that 3 weeks later, while she was sweeping under a piece of furniture that had not been moved in years, she found the ring in a forgotten corner. The Saint of Padua, who had kept silent while the object was substituting for the soul, gave the object back when the soul returned to first place. That story explains something crucial about the Antonian charism. Anthony returns what has been lost, but he returns it at the moment and in the order that helps the soul of the devotee and of the departed loved one, never before. When returning, the object serves conversion, and the suffrage, he returns it. When returning, it would distract the suffrage or harden an attachment. The saint prefers to wait. His silence is teaching. His delay is pure charity, ordered by God himself. Here is the peak of seriousness of this third petition. When you ask the saint of Padua for the object of your departed loved one on June 13th, at the bottom of the petition, there is something that only you can see. Do you want that object in order to pray better for the soul of your departed loved one, or in order to fill with it a void that only faith can truly fill? What you answer in silence to that question marks all the difference between honoring the departed loved one through prayer and holding on to him through attachment, between accompanying your deceased one in his passage toward God and clutching at a material sign that has already fulfilled its first purpose, which was to be a bridge and aid. There is still a fourth petition, deeply common in homes with prolonged grief and weary prayer, which confuses the mission proper to the living with the mission proper to the saint in glory. A petition that seems like humility and looked at slowly is the delegation of what only the grieving heart can offer for its departed one. For 4 centuries, the Church has been repeating an uncomfortable truth about the suffrage for the departed loved ones. Since the Council of Trent, in the 25th session of the year 1563, defined with doctrinal authority that the souls detained in purgatory are helped by the suffrages of the faithful, and in a singular way by the sacrifice of the altar. That word, suffrages, matters a great deal. The fourth misdirected petition to the saint of Padua tries unknowingly to transfer those suffrages to another instance. It transfers them to the saint. And in transferring them, it empties the exact place where the soul of the departed loved one most needs to find the one who loved him. The fourth petition is worded in something like these words: Saint Anthony, you free him. You take him out of purgatory. I cannot do this anymore. I have been praying for years and I see no signs. I have no strength left. You do it for me because you really do have power in heaven. The grieving heart speaks these words out of exhaustion. Year after year of persevering prayer, anniversaries that come around again, June 13th that arrive once more, and find the family praying the same prayer they have been praying for a decade. In that weariness, the petition looks like humility. It seems to acknowledge that the saint can do more than the devotee. It even seems like a form of brave faith. And yet, looked at slowly, that petition is delegating precisely what cannot be delegated, what only you can offer for your departed one in the exact economy of the suffrage. Because the suffrage, in Catholic teaching, has a very specific property that almost no catechist explains with sufficient clarity. The suffrage of the living for the departed one is applied to the soul in purgatory through the supernatural union that existed between the two of them during life on earth. That union, sealed by blood, by sacrament, by friendship, by the concrete charity of the years shared together, is what gives the suffrage a particular effectiveness that no other type of prayer reaches in the same way. Your prayer for your father has a weight of its own that no other prayer reproduces, not even the prayer of a saint in heaven. The same is true of a son's prayer for a mother, of a husband's for his wife, of a grandchild's for a grandparent. The saint of Padua, doctor of the church though he is, receives the commission to present your prayer before the throne of God, never the commission to replace it. Saint Teresa of Jesus left this written with astonishing clarity in chapter 2 of The Way of Perfection. She wrote, in her own words, that no prayer of the highest saint in heaven replaces the small, humble prayer of the heart that loved the departed one in life. The Saint of Avila said that God established that order with incomprehensible wisdom. The love received on earth is returned in heaven through the suffrage of the one who loved, and no saint, no matter how great his charity, could do for a soul what is done by the concrete person who loved that soul out of faith. That Teresian teaching has an immense consequence for your June 13th. It means that the soul of your departed loved one, wherever that soul is waiting specifically for your prayer. Yours. The prayer of the one who loved him in life. Yours, presented by Anthony. Yours, strengthened by the saint's intercession. Yours, applied by the merit of Christ. But always yours. The soul of the departed one recognizes that prayer. It recognizes the inner tone of the one who prayed for it for years. It recognizes the spiritual signature of the concrete person to whom it was joined by blood or by sacrament. And that prayer of yours, however small it may seem, however weary you may feel, is worth before the throne of God infinitely more than any delegation to the saint in glory. There is a text gathered by Father Gracian in his notes written after the saint's death, dated in the 1790s of the 16th century, where an expression is preserved that she would have used with her daughters concerning the souls in purgatory. The soul in purgatory, she said, when it receives the prayer of one of its family members, feels something like the relief that fresh water brings to an open wound. When that family prayer is absent, no other help from heaven reproduces that specific relief. The saint intercedes. Souls help one another. But the prayer of the one who loved the departed in life has an unrepeatable taste for the soul that receives it. Here is the peak of seriousness of this fourth petition. When you ask the saint of Padua to free the departed loved one himself in your place, what the saint receives is a request for substitution that the divine order does not allow. Anthony hears that petition with charity, carries it before God, but heaven's answer is an invitation for you to return to the place of prayer. The saint sends you back to your post, and your post on this June 13th is the irreplaceable post of the one who loved the departed one and still has the sacred responsibility of offering for him what only he can offer. What then should you do on June 13th if you have been weary of praying for years and feel that you cannot go on? The Teresian answer has a moving tenderness. Ask the saint of Padua to give you the strength to keep praying. Ask him to present your weary prayer as if it were a fervent one, and give him permission to restore in you the perseverance that prolonged grief has eroded, and offer again, even with poor words, even with a sigh, your own suffrage. The saint does not replace you. The saint accompanies you so that you can keep going. And there is one last petition, the fifth, made in many homes with astonishing candor, without noticing that it inverts the order of the communion of saints. A petition that uses the departed loved one as a bridge to obtain material favors. It harms the soul of the deceased without anyone in the family suspecting it. Don Ramiro walked into the church one June 13th with his head bowed and his shoulders tense. He had in his pocket a bill from the hospital where his grandson was still admitted with a pneumonia that was getting worse without any clear explanation. He knelt before the image of St. Anthony, lit a candle, took the photograph of his departed wife from his pocket, and made the petition he had been rehearsing since dawn. His words were these: St. Anthony, through my wife, Carmen, who is in heaven, heal my grandson. Through her merits, through everything she prayed for this family, through the masses she requested and the alms she gave, grant me this favor. I ask you in her name and through her. May her intercession carry weight before God. That scene repeats itself every June 13th in thousands of Hispanic churches with minimal variations. Names and circumstances change, but the inner structure of the petition is always the same. The devotee comes before the saint of Padua using the departed loved one as collateral or as a spiritual credit, as currency to obtain a temporal favor. And here, Saint Teresa of Jesus, If she could be in the pew next to Don Ramiro and see the maneuver his heart performed without realizing it, would take his hand with tenderness and explain to him something that would change his way of asking forever. This is the fifth misdirected petition, the most subtle of them all. It seems the most respectful toward the departed loved one, because it presupposes that soul's holiness and active intercession, and yet it completely inverts the order of the communion of saints. The inversion is so silent that most devotees spend a whole lifetime using it without ever noticing the problem hidden inside. Look carefully at what happens when someone asks the saint of Padua for a material favor in the name of the departed loved one. That person is taking for granted two things that Catholic teaching never authorizes the devotee to take for granted. The first, that the soul of the departed loved one already enjoys the beatific vision and therefore can intercede in the proper sense. The second, that this supposed intercession can be used as an argument before the saint, as merit accumulated to obtain a concrete favor in temporal matters. The two things, together, turn the departed loved one into a tool, and by turning him into a tool, they take away from him the place of a soul that still needs the prayer of those who loved him. Saint Teresa of Avila left this written in her family letters, especially in those addressed to her brother Lorenzo de Cepeda and to the Duchess of Alba in 1577. The saint criticized, with her characteristic firmness, those devout persons who used their departed loved ones to obtain temporal favors without having first made sure of the eternal rest of those very departed ones. She said it was an inverted order, and that this order harms the very one the devotee believes he is helping. The soul of the departed loved one receives the prayer of his family with a particular joy when that prayer is directed to his eternal rest. When that same soul is invoked to serve as a lever for material favors, it receives a very different message. It receives the message that the family is still more concerned about its earthly problems than about his eternal salvation. Here there is a delicate point. The Church permits and blesses asking a canonized departed soul, such as Saint Teresa of Avila herself, for her intercession for temporal favors. That is part of the authorized public worship. What doctrine never authorizes is transferring that mechanism to a departed loved one of the family, whose eternal state is veiled and whose private canonization in the heart of the devotee has no doctrinal foundation. When you ask the saint of Padua for a material favor in the name of your departed mother, your father, or your husband, you are presupposing a holiness that the Church has not proclaimed. And here is the peak of seriousness of this fifth petition, which very few confessors dare to point out clearly because it wounds the heart. When you ask the saint of Padua for a material favor in the name of your departed loved one, and by chance or by grace that favor arrives, the immediate danger is to interpret the answer as confirmation of the sanctity already attained by the departed one. And from that moment on, family prayer for the soul of the deceased decreases, because the family feels that he is already in a position to grant favors. The inversion is consolidated. The departed loved one comes to be treated as a non-canonized household saint, and the prayer that the soul still needs slowly goes out in the home, generation after generation. This is exactly what Saint Teresa of Jesus would have wanted to avoid at all costs in devout homes like yours. The Saint of Avila asked for purity of intention. She asked that when one prays for a departed loved one, the prayer be for the departed loved one, and that when one asks for temporal favors, those favors be asked of the saint in glory or of Christ directly, without making an instrument of the soul still awaiting eternal rest. What then should you do on June 13th, when you carry in your heart an urgent material need in the name of a beloved departed one? The Teresian answer is of moving elegance. Separate them. First, pray for the soul of your departed loved one, asking nothing in return, offering the Mass and the suffrage simply because that soul needs it. And only afterward, in separate prayer, ask the saint of Padua or Christ directly for the temporal favor you need, without using the departed loved one as collateral, without turning him into currency. These are the 5 misdirected petitions that millions of devout Catholics have been directing to the Saint of Padua every June 13th for centuries. 5 petitions the devotee makes with sincere love and which carry within them, unknown to him, a silent disorder. Now comes what matters, what you should ask on June 13th for your departed loved one, and that changes absolutely everything. At this point, take a breath before we go on. What comes now is something like a letting go. Letting go of the bent petitions and the weariness of misdirected grief. Letting go of presumption, of the search for signs, of the attachment to the object. Setting aside the delegation of the suffrage and the use of the departed loved one as collateral. And then discovering what St. Anthony truly can ask for your departed loved one on June 13th, when you give his charism the exact channel heaven has prepared for it. There are 3 correct petitions. 3. And they fit within a visit to the church, a mass requested in his name, a quiet prayer offered on June 13th. St. Teresa of Jesus, who understood better than anyone how prayer is ordered so that it may bear fruit, would have said them in words like the ones that come now. The first correct petition has to do with the central charism of the Saint of Padua, the restitution of what was spiritually lost. When you come before his image on June 13th with the name of your departed loved one in your heart, what you may ask with full doctrinal confidence and with the certainty that this petition lies within what the saint grants is this: Saint Anthony, restore in his soul everything that was lost during his earthly life. Give back to my departed loved one what slipped away through carelessness, through weakness, through wounds he never managed to heal. Restore in his soul the integrity that sin and time had been stealing from him, so that when he stands fully before the face of the Father, he may stand with all the good that God had sown in him. That petition Saint Anthony presents with singular power. It lies at the very center of what he did in his lifetime every time he preached. And he presents it before the throne of God as a doctor of the Church, with the doctrinal authority his title confers. When you make that petition, the whole Antonian charism is activated for your departed loved one, and the soul of the deceased receives an acceleration of the process of purification that no other petition manages to set in motion in the same way. The second correct petition touches the living, you, your family, those who loved the departed one and still love him from here. Saint Anthony, said Saint Teresa of Avila to her daughters, was especially effective when one asked for conversions in homes marked by a loss, because the pain of grief opens hearts in a way that no other circumstance opens them. And the Saint of Padua knows how to come in through that crack to plant faith, where before there was routine, deep prayer, where before there was habit, sacramental life, where before there was distance. The petition you should make sounds like this: Saint Anthony, on this June 13th, as I remember my departed loved one, truly convert those of us who are still alive. May his death not have passed through our lives without leaving authentic conversion. May his name awaken us from lukewarmness and lead us this very day to the sacrament. That petition is the one that brings the most joy to the soul of the departed loved one in his purification, because it means his death bore fruit, that his loved ones are better because of him, that his passing through the earth left something more than absence. Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote in the book of her Foundations that the souls in Purgatory rejoice in a particular way when they see that their family members come closer to God because of their death, and that this joy shortens their death almost without their understanding it themselves. Applied to June 13th, that teaching means that your conversion today, because of your departed loved one, is for him more relief than any concrete favor you could ask the saint in his name. The third correct petition is the most intimate of them all. And it sounds like a whisper. Saint Anthony, make me a better intercessor for my departed loved one. Take my weary prayer, my distracted rosary, my hurriedly requested masses, and present them before the throne of God as if they were the prayers of a fervent soul. And above all, give me back perseverance. Restore the desire to keep praying for him even as the years go by. And give me faith that my small prayer offered today still reaches his soul with a taste that only that soul recognizes. That petition is entirely within the Antonian charism, because it is a petition for restitution applied to the suffrage itself. The saint gives the praying strength back to the heart that has been praying for years and feels it can do no more. And in giving it back, he multiplies the effect of every suffrage that follows. What you pray from that moment on will be worse before God, infinitely more, because it comes from a soul restored by the touch of the saint of Padua. If you make these 3 petitions on June 13th in this order and with this intention, the soul of your departed loved one receives an amount of grace that no other date of the year brings him with the same fullness. It is the feast of the saint, the anniversary of his entrance into glory, the moment of the year when heaven, to put it in the words of Saint Teresa of Avila, seems closer and lower. And the soul that was waiting there for the prayer of his loved ones receives, on that June 13th, the concrete relief he had been waiting months for. Here the circle closes that Saint Teresa of Jesus would have wanted to close with you. The 5 wrong petitions are released, the 3 correct ones are embraced. And June 13th becomes what it was always meant to be for your family, a day of spiritual restitution, of conversion of the living, and of the acceleration of the suffrage for the beloved soul. That, nothing else than that, is what the saint of Padua has reserved for your departed loved one on this day of grace. And now comes the last thing. What stays with you when all the words of this teaching have died away? What stays with you is this: the certainty that the next time you light a candle before the saint of Padua, you will already know what to ask and what to let go of. The certainty that your departed loved one, wherever he is in his process of purification, will from today receive a prayer better ordered, purer, much more useful for him. The certainty that years of asking for what could not be granted have been left behind, and that before you opens a way of praying for your deceased one, that heaven does reward with singular effectiveness. That certainty is the most concrete gift Saint Teresa of Jesus wanted to leave you today, a gift that does not stay only in your head. It comes down to your heart, settles into your way of praying, transforms from now on every candle you light and every rosary you offer for the soul you love. You also take with you something more intimate. You take with you the peace of knowing that the saint of Padua has never ignored you, not even when you were asking him for things he could not grant. He was listening to every tear. He was presenting every intention before the throne of God with the charity proper to a doctor of the church. And all he was waiting for was this moment when you would understand what he had set aside for your departed loved one. The grace that seemed denied to you for years was him protecting you and the soul you love. That patience with which heaven sustained your journey until today tells you everything you need to know about how God loves you and how he will love your departed loved one from now on through your renewed prayer. Stay just a moment longer before these words die away into the air of your home. Stay, because there is something Saint Teresa of Jesus wanted to leave for the end, something that completes everything you have just received. It is the piece that closes from within all the rest of the teaching. Without it, what you learned today would remain like a map missing its last ink mark, a key missing its last tooth, a prayer missing the word that seals it before God. There is a Teresian secret very few devotees know about the souls in Purgatory, a secret the Saint of Avila kept in order to teach it only to souls already prepared to receive it. And you, after listening to this complete teaching, are now prepared. Your ears are clean. Your heart is in its place. You are ready to hear what many of the great devotees of the Saint of Padua never came to understand in 5 centuries of popular devotion. It is a secret that has to do with the difference between a soul that receives mechanical prayer and a soul that receives transformed prayer. It has to do with a detail that changes forever the way your departed loved one experiences every suffrage you offer. And it has to do, above all, with a specific day of the year, different from June 13th, on which Saint Teresa of Jesus taught that the soul of the departed one receives a special relief that no other date manages to bring it. There is another teaching waiting for you. A teaching straight from Saint Teresa of Jesus on how to pray effectively for the souls you loved on this earth. A teaching that gathers everything you learned today and lifts it one step higher. A teaching no devotee should miss after having come this far. If your heart feels that this time together has brought you something true, if you sense that every word was prepared for you, if you have the clear impression that arriving here today was part of a higher plan, then it is worth your while to listen to what comes next. Because what comes next bears the seal of the same source, the same maternal love, the same doctrinal clarity, the same firmness of the Saint of Avila. And it completes, one layer deeper, what your departed loved one needs to receive from you at this stage of your spiritual life. Stay with this teaching to the very end, and then take one more step. May the grace received today bear fruit before it dissolves into the rush of the day. There is a next step waiting for you, one more word that Saint Teresa of Jesus wants to say to you, and a soul, the soul of your departed loved one, who will benefit greatly from your listening just a little longer. The Saint of Padua has been leading you to this point all along, and Saint Teresa of Jesus from heaven smiles now, seeing you closer to the doctrinal truth she has been wanting to give you for years. Allow her to take the next step with you. Allow her maternal voice to keep speaking a little while longer in your home, in your kitchen, in your room, wherever you are listening to this teaching with an open heart. And before I say goodbye, dear listener, dear faithful soul who has walked through every word of this teaching with holy patience, let me leave you with the blessing that Saint Teresa of Jesus would have wanted to pronounce over your home this afternoon of June 13th. May the peace of the Lord rest upon you as it rests upon the souls who already know what to ask for. May the Saint of Padua present before God the name of your departed loved one with that infinite charity that only the doctors of the Church possess in heaven. May the redeeming blood of Christ, our Lord, fall upon the soul of your departed one like fresh dew on parched ground at dawn. May every minute of his purification from today on find relief in your well-ordered prayer. And may you, my daughter, my son, keep walking with your head held high and your heart firm, knowing that every prayer of yours for your departed loved one from today on will carry a different weight in the scales of heaven. Saint Teresa of Jesus said it in her own words in one of the most beautiful passages of the book of her life, that no true love is ever left without an answer when it is offered to God in humility. Your love for your departed loved one, offered today to God through the Saint of Padua, is already being received in heaven. Walk in peace. Return to prayer as soon as you can, without old weights, without bent petitions, with a heart light as it ought to be, after a teaching received with docility. And remember, every time you think of him, that Saint Teresa of Jesus walks with you and accompanies you to the door of your home with that maternal smile her daughters were still remembering in Avila decades after they had lost her.